What does Daniel do? What is the first thing he does? He drew the line of resistance by training his appetite. He drew the line of resistance by training his appetite. There was nothing wrong with him enjoying the meal at the king's table. It was a luxury. It was a beautiful privilege. I have a friend who loves to go to the big buffets, and he says he gets it from the Bible because Paul says to buffet your body. Always enjoying all of the varieties, all of the nice foods and so on. Well, once in a way it's great to do that. But you do it as a habit, you do it as a constant desire, then you find you really can't, because you can't afford a new tailor every day to get all the expansion that is taking place within you. But more than that, it dulls your sensitivities. He drew the line of resistance in order to train his appetite. Ladies and gentlemen, appetites need to be trained. It doesn't happen overnight. How you react in life is a training of the will and a training of the mind. That's why Jesus says to let the eye be single, because the eye is the lamp of the body, and if the light within you becomes darkness, how great is the darkness indeed. May I suggest to you, almost every kind of sensual temptation starts with the eye. Starts with the eye gate. And that's why, what did Satan do to our Lord himself? Showed him all the kingdoms of this world. That eye power. This is wow. This is beautiful. This is enchanting. I'll give you all of these things if you will bow down and worship me. The amazing thing to me is that these young men with strong appetites and certainly a desire for the best of culinary options said, we are not going to do this, because if we do this, we will get so softened up that ultimately we'll be marching to his tune and to his drum beat. We lose the purpose for which God has really placed us here. In any palace, even if the monarch is not walking to the drumbeat of God, I found it amazing how many times God puts a person in that palace who's marching to a different drummer. You've got Joseph, you've got Nehemiah, and here you've got Daniel. They are listening to a different voice, marching to a different drumbeat. This idea of training the eye gate and training your will and training your appetite is a very hard thing to do. I was in a country that I'll leave unnamed, and I had just sought a meal to have all by myself. And as I sat down quietly, all alone, for the first time in about 3 days, to have one meal just so I didn't have to use my voice and answer questions. I sat down, and a guy was walking by my table, and he kept looking at his cell phone and looking at me. I said, I know exactly what's happening here. And you almost at that moment feel like this dinner is over, I'm heading back to my room. And then he comes and he kneels by my side and shows me my picture on his telephone. He says, "This you?" I said, "What do you think?" He said, "Now that I've heard your voice, it is you." I don't know this guy. I had no idea who he was. He told me which country he came from. He wasn't a citizen of the country where I was. And then he looked at me and he said, "Mr. Zacharias, I listened to your podcasts. I listened to your messages. I really want to love the Lord. I want to serve him completely. But my enslavement to pornography is killing me." He was in his 20s. And I put my arm around him and started talking to him. And I thought to myself, you know what? I don't even know this guy. Just think how painful it must be, what he is living through, for him to come to a total stranger, at least in terms of a face-to-face encounter, and the uppermost burning question on his mind: was, can you help me get rid of what I am addicted to? I take you back to some years ago where it was late at night and I had received a telephone call. It's always wonderful to have my wife with me. By the way, we don't often travel together. The grandchildren have beaten me to the draw. They've always got a greater need than I have. And she'll tell you, for Ravi, his worldview changes after 9 p.m. I don't think anything good comes into my life after 9 p.m. So I'm in bed reading. I want to be horizontal by that point and probably just look at another dawn. I don't want to go into the lateness of the night. I'm an early riser. So anybody who phones me after 9 o'clock, it's either an emergency or they've got the wrong number. So I picked it up, and it wasn't a wrong number. It was somebody who knew me very well. He said, Rav, are you awake? I said, I am now. He said, I got a problem I want to talk to you about. He was a surgeon. And he said, I've been doing surgery all night. And this woman was brought into surgery. She was so badly beaten. Every bone was broken, basically. The bigger ones were shattered. And when the paramedics wheeled her in, they said, Doc, she's gone. No point dealing with it, she's gone. But he said, I looked at that broken body and I said, there's no way this can happen. I had no idea what had gone on. So he told the team he was going to scrub and do whatever he could. He put his gloves on, everything. And he said the only hope was to give her a direct heart massage and see if I could revive her. They tried everything else, pounding on the chest and all. So he cut the rib cage, put his hand directly into the chest cavity, took the heart in his hand and started to give it an actual direct heart massage. And it didn't work. He walked away from there and he said, whatever happened to her? Who did this to her? So he's washing his hands when the nurse comes and says, Doc, I think you better look at this. She brought a bag, emptied it out onto the table. She was a drug junkie. There were all kinds of used needles in there. And as he was looking at all that stuff, he noticed in his haste to put his hand into the ribcage, he'd nicked his finger. And as he looked at that nicked finger, slightly bleeding, whatever, he said, I think I've made contact with diseased blood. I said, is it a deep cut? He said, no, it's a paper-thin cut. I said, now you're telling me a paper-thin cut could put you at risk to destroy your whole immune system if you've made contact with that kind of diseased blood. He said, it doesn't take any more than that. A paper-thin cut. Albeit at one point even a gloved hand. And I remember when I finished talking to him and he said he'd gone and given some blood for a test and he said a complete, comprehensive answer can only come in a few days, but I'm just hoping that I've not destroyed my body tonight. And I put my head back on the pillow and I thought to myself, are there paper-thin cuts to the soul? Can you make that little slight laceration that makes you vulnerable and exposed to something that can destroy your spiritual immune system? So especially to you young men, I say to you, what are you toying with? What do you hold in your hand? What do you see on your phone? What have you allowed the world to have access into your soul that gives those initial paper-thin cuts that down the years can put your marriage and everything else at risk? So I had my arm around this young boy in his 20s from another country as his face was just covered with tears and people looking, saying, what is going on here? This guy is sitting here having his dinner, another fellow comes and then he starts talking to him and now he's kneeling beside him and crying his heart out because he knew that he'd got some pretty deep wounds into himself. If that's your case, tonight should be the night you turn things around. That you make that commitment, that you turn to God for healing. that you turn to God for strength and power, as has been so beautifully sung in many of the songs. And I say to you, draw the line of resistance to train your appetite, because whatever you feed into your imagination takes hold and wreaks havoc. And in the years to come, you find out it didn't happen overnight, but a little at a time, a little at a time, and a little at a time, and you lost your way. We travel all over the globe. One of my colleagues is here. We travel all over the globe and we listen to stories. And that's what we hear again and again and again. I made this choice. I went there. I did this. Ladies and gentlemen, march to the drumbeat of God. March to the drumbeat of God. Because His word abides forever. And it is vital that you learn that the world will be there to always tempt and test. And God's will for you is always to know how to say no to the things that will lead you astray, so that you don't have to look back and say, when did this all happen? So he drew the line of resistance.